Anderson.
Thank you for joining us today. It is the weekend edition, and we are so grateful that you can join us over the next couple of hours. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about some of these economic issues, and you will see that we've posted some articles there. Probably get a look at the final cancellation of the Keystone Pipeline, what that might mean as well. A number of media stories that turned out to be lies that might have actually helped Joe Biden become the president, and we will get into perhaps some of the other topics that are relevant. Of course, it's Pride Month, and Penna Dexter's commentary is on that. Penna Dexter with me, and Dr. Merrill Matthews. First of all, let me say, Dr. Merrill Matthews, thank you for covering very well for me on Tuesday while I was out speaking. So thank you for that.
We enjoyed it. It was a good show.
And you will be doing that in the future. The National Religious Broadcasters Convention will be not this week, but next week, a couple of weeks from now. But you'll be in, and I know Penna will be in. And Penna, I have to say, congratulations. You have another grandson.
I do. Clayton Dexter, and he's doing great. Lots of fun.
Yes, and that's one of the reasons why we don't always see you, because you're babysitting all the other grandkids. And if you want to see cute kids, Dr. Matthews, have you seen that? These
You're talking about my grandkids?
Well, we all have grandkids, but I mean,
and they're all cute. They're all really cute
but
too.
It's amazing. They could be models for kids' clothes and everything.
Oh.
The red hair, they're just the cuties. So anyway, we have lots to cover today, and so let's do so. And Dr. Merrill Matthews, I put you on the spot because I love to read your commentaries, but this one I thought was well done. A backdoor scheme for raising the minimum wage. And of course, there's been a push to raise the minimum wage, but when you start telling people that if you actually stay home, that's almost equivalent to making $16 an hour by staying home, maybe that's one of the reasons why we still see the desire to keep paying people not to work. What's your thoughts?
It's interesting because we see this pressure. We see the new jobs reports coming out, and they have been underwhelming. I mean, in April, they thought there would be about nearly 1 million new jobs. It was at like 260,000 or something like that.
Right.
Last month, they thought it was going to be in the neighborhood of 600 some odd thousand. It was in 500. It was about 110,000 short. And people are scratching their heads saying, what's going on here? Why aren't people going back to work? And one can make the case that it's because you're getting some the state unemployment benefits plus $300 a week extra from the federal government that Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden wanted in their American Rescue Plan. And you put it together, and you need to be making if you need to be making more than say $34,000 a year, plus you can get child care coming up next month, starting July, and you get health insurance from Obamacare, because if you don't have much of an income, you get free health insurance. So there's a lot of economic reasons to stay home, and I think Joe Biden has a plan.
Well, your title is provocative because we talked a few months ago about they tried to raise the minimum wage federally, nationally in one of the COVID packages, and were unsuccessful in doing so because they couldn't do it by reconciliation. Right. And, this has occurred to me as I've looked at this and said, okay, in order to get these people back to work, companies are, if it hurts them, they can't do it if it hurts them too badly. But many will just start to raise wages and offer more money.
And that's going on now.
And yes. And so, could they get, and this is what you're asking here and making a good case, that they could be getting to a minimum wage through the back door.
Right. Yes. So what I think is happening is when Joe Biden was asked about this, President Biden said, I don't really think that's the case. People want to go to work. I don't think they're not working because they're getting too much money. Well, you have to see the reports coming out. You have to see the economics and the messages from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Employers across the country are begging for employees and can't get them, and many of them have gone on the news and said we're just bumping up our wages in order to try to attract more people, and it's happening slowly. And so I think the Democrats are just denying it, knowing that in fact it's the case, hoping to get those employers to raise the wages because they're not going to be able to get the minimum wage passed that they want, which is $15 an hour.
You look at this, and at first I thought, well, people are going to choose between a job, which they have been offered, and taking this money. And you think, well, these lazy people, they should be taking the job. But really, it's a pretty big economic calculus for a lot of people. And they have families, and they can actually stay home with their kids. And, one comment out of the Washington Post was that the government has been subsidizing an extended sabbatical for a large part of the workforce. That is scary when you think about that, because there also has been talk of this guaranteed wage, this guaranteed income.
Right. Universal basic income.
Yeah, right. And this has nothing to do with working.
Right.
So are we going to become a country where half or less than half of the country is subsidizing, the rest not working?
Some are arguing that we're already getting there with this and the child credit that's come in, and of course the left wants to make that a law. But it's interesting because the $300 extra per week ends in September. Roughly 25 states have said we're ending it early. Texas, I think, is ending it in July. At the end of June, I think. Some others are ending it in July. All of those are Republican states that are ending it. Every one of them are Republican states that are ending it early. But it's interesting because getting up to the $15, if you're a large corporation and you're trying to get benefits or trying to make nice with the administration, some of them have already said we're going to go ahead and move our entry wage up to $15 an hour in order to make nice with the Democrats in power, and at the same time try to be able to attract more workers.
That story came out the other day. Chipotle said, okay, minimum wage, $15 an hour, whether you're folding a burrito, whether you're working in the back washing dishes, whatever, or stacking various things. And so if this continues down, you will have a de facto minimum wage, because that's the only way to have enough people to keep your business open.
And you're going to have some expensive burritos.
Yes. There was a line that I can't use on the air that they had about the burrito. But anyway, just before we take a break, though, let's come back to universal basic income, because what the argument of Andrew Wang is, you're going to have robotics. We are. You're going to have artificial intelligence. We are. And there's going to come a point in time where there really may not be enough jobs for individuals. That's his argument. But we might have it actually putting the cart before the horse. That is, people not wanting to get jobs. So it forces anybody that has the ability to have robotics replace an individual to do so.
And it's already going on. You go to Walmart. Walmart used to have nothing but clerks who checked you out. Now, most of the Walmarts, they're all self-checkout with one person sort of overseeing that. That part of that was pandemic related, reducing contact, but part of it also is allowing them to move to automating many of these jobs that will never come back.
All of the supermarkets that I go to, except for Trader Joe's, have a lot of little kiosks now for self-checkout. I usually go to the people.
Usually do, too. Well, and I know Penna probably is not one to go to McDonald's, but I've been to one or two where you can actually order it and not even talk to a person. You're just right there on the computer, basically. So that shows you something very dramatic as well. Well, we have a lot more to cover, and we'll stay in the economic area because one of the articles here, Philip Klein, this is not a drill. Inflation is here. And I was just in an elevator, and I heard some guys talking about the cost of lumber and construction, and so we got talking about that even as the elevator was going down, and they are just wondering when we are going to get accurate measures of inflation, because they're convinced that it's not 2% or 4%. It's closer to 8 to 12%. And I think they're right. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
President Biden wants to raise taxes. His plan is to repeal and replace the Trump tax cuts, which not only will affect corporations, but your income tax liability. So let me give you a brief history in order to put some of this into perspective. After the Civil War, nearly all taxes were repealed, and the federal government relied mostly on tariffs for revenues. This income was more than enough to run the government and generated significant surpluses. The problem is the tariffs are essentially a consumption tax that is regressive and adversely affects the poor. This created political pressure to institute an income tax on the rich. President Grover Cleveland and the Democratic majorities in both houses of Congress passed an income tax that affected only the wealthiest 1% of Americans. The tax was attacked in the court because it represented a direct tax, which the Constitution requires to be apportioned equally among the states. This was not the case and led to the Supreme Court striking down the law. After that decision, pressure grew to tax incomes on the largely untaxed rich. President William Howard Taft proposed a constitutional amendment to legalize a personal income tax while also imposing a tax on corporate profits as a stopgap measure. By 1913, the 16th Amendment was ratified. President Woodrow Wilson promptly passed a personal income tax, and the corporate income tax was intended to be a stopgap but was left in place and has often been used by the rich to play one tax against the other. When you look at the history of taxation in this country, you can see that the problem isn't that Americans are undertaxed, but that government is overspent. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you hear on Viewpoints by visiting pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again in studio with us today, Dr. Merrill Matthews, Penna, Dexter. And last week, you might remember that we had Gary Bauer on for about 2 segments. And I told Gary, I said, I think I've broken the code. I figured out that the mainstream media does not like to talk about any story that starts with the letter I. Inflation. Oh, no, inflation doesn't exist. Immigration. No, there's no crisis at the border. Then we did spend time talking about Israel, Iran, and a couple of others.
Infrastructure and what the definition really is.
So we were just having a laugh about that. But let's get back to first inflation, and then we'll get to immigration in just a minute. Penna, Dexter, I posted this piece, and it's our second article. Not a drill. Inflation is here. And we keep having people suggest that, well, don't believe your lying eyes. We're just fine. And there's no inflation. We're doing great. And there's just a sense in which we, I think, are having a personal experience that inflation is here and it's real and it's not temporary. What's your thoughts?
Well, it's at a 13-year-old high as of the reports yesterday, 5% over year over year over last May. And on just the core products like food and energy, it's up 3.8%. And, you know, a lot of us looked at what happened with all the money that was given out basically under COVID, and you could see that that could be inflationary. But there are many other things that are. And one, I mean, you can see that under COVID, people saved money. A lot of people who had jobs didn't spend as much money. So there's now a 14.9% savings rate. So people have the dollars. And then we have the supply chain blockades. So we have fewer products and more dollars chasing them. So just some of those things show us that we actually are experiencing it. We're in the midst of it. What trajectory it's on, we don't know for sure, because some of this could balance out after, it settles down after going back from the lockdowns. But for the Fed to just deny it, I think, is irresponsible. You don't know if that's just their public statements or not. But I think it is something to look at and worry about. And, you can look at the good and the bad. I mean, it also means that we've got high demand for products, and that's a good thing. But if you don't have the products, it's an inflationary thing. And
again, you said something in passing that it's worth mentioning, and that is we've increased the money supply. So you can see that on a graph that I've made available. But you also said that a lot of people saved, and that's what's called the velocity of money. And so right now, a fair amount of it's locked away, maybe in the stock market, locked away in savings accounts. So in some respects, we don't have as much inflation if it all just spread out quickly. But we also know what's coming. It's like holding holding water back from maybe the ocean and then open it up and then letting the tide finally come through, it's going to affect us later on. So, Dr. Merrill Matthews, we need to recognize that we're being told right now that inflation is not that much, but it's all tied to the consumer price index, and you've looked at that.
Right, and they, I think we had 5% inflation last month. I was about 4 the month before, and the Fed continues to think that this is temporary, this is a surge. My guess is that part of the surge is temporary, but not all of it. That is to say, think of if you have a hurricane that hits a state and it sort of really creates some devastation there. You see gas prices go up, you see food prices go up, and building materials and so forth. But then when in a month or 2 or 3 it sort of settles back down. But what's happening here is that even if you're going to say these price surges are somewhat temporary, now that we're giving people larger incomes, now that we're increasing wages and other things, that's going to stay in. No employer is going to come back and say, I gave you $15 an hour. Now that things are settled back down, I'm lowering you back down to 12. And that feeds through the system.
Yes, it does.
So my get, and generally speaking, vendors, if they were able to get a whole lot more for their product, they may be willing to come back down to some extent based upon competition, but they want the higher price if they can get it. So there's seller preferences there. So my guess is we're seeing this surge. I suspect it will settle down a little bit, but we will end at a higher rate than we were. And how high that rate's going to be, I don't know. But you made a key point about the velocity of money. During the most of this money has been sitting aside, and one of the reasons why we think inflation has been relatively flat for a decade now, even though the federal government the Fed has been pumping money into the economy, is that much of it's not going anywhere. It's sitting there in reserves as a way to shore up the bank, or in our bank accounts, or in the stock market, or something of that nature. As people start pulling that out and spending it, and the velocity of money is how fast money turns over.
Right.
That you would expect that to put upward pressure on inflation as well.
And Penna mentioned it, and I just found this in a Wall Street Journal article I didn't post, but it said that the personal savings rate in April was 14.9%, which is double what it was before the pandemic. So 3 cheers for at least individual saving.
And very high for the U.S. because we're not a saving country.
That's almost getting close to Japan, which is the all-time record.
And China. I mean, China's tend to have something, not because they didn't have anything to buy there in the past.
Yes. It also gets back to the consumer price index, and that is, as you and I have talked about before, the consumer price index is a basket of goods. Now, those baskets of goods are oftentimes not looking at things like food and energy. And you can ask Penna when she goes to the grocery store, are food prices going up? Sure. Matter of fact, we not only are seeing the price of lumber going up, but I was looking at some of these others. For example, used cars, because we don't have cars, 29%. Airline fees, you just flew somewhere, that's 24% increase. And you just, footwear is even another 7%. You just go down this list. But if you find yourself saying, well, I'm spending a lot more money, but they're not saying the inflation's that bad. It's because they're not measuring the kinds of things that most of us around this table and most of our listeners are actually purchasing. And so that's the first issue to pay attention to. The second is, does anybody think that the Federal Reserve will stop printing money anytime soon, especially under the Biden administration that's trying to come up? There's another I. Infrastructure. Let's spend $2 trillion on infrastructure, when the other day we talked about Stephen Moore says at best only $600 billion, which is still a lot of money, could be in any stretch of the imagination called infrastructure. But if you pass something like that, nobody's buying our treasuries. China's not buying our treasuries. Japan's not buying our treasuries. Americans are not buying their treasuries. So the Federal Reserve has to buy them. And the way they buy them is print more money. That means the dollars in your pocketbook, your purse, your wallet are going to be worth a lot less in the future, aren't they?
Roughly about half of the 12 governors of the Fed now are saying, at least quietly, it's time for us to at least tell people we're beginning to think that at some point in the near future we may have to begin to scale back our buying and close these programs out. But they're being very tentative about it because they know what happens if they even if they even wiggle inflation, the stock market goes down, and you create a lot of volatility and concern in the economy. So they're trying to be very, very careful about what they've done, and many groups, including the Wall Street Journal, have argued for some time back years ago, and then more recently, it's time to start scaling this back. You're putting too much money into the economy.
Yes, about 35% increase, or 35% of all the dollars in the world were created within the last approximately 14 months.
And you can make that case if the economy's doing terrible, but the economy's not. State revenues are up. Federal government is doing well. Most people, there have been a number of people who've been hit hard by the pandemic. That's a fact. But many, many people have done well with this.
You know, when we look at all the plans to spend money, the infrastructure plan being one of them, and of course, it's not going to be bipartisan, we don't think now, but they'll probably go ahead with it. There may be this group of senators that have come up with something that may pass muster. But really, the plan was, Biden's plan was to raise taxes to pay for it. And that has been absolutely a non-starter for the Republicans, which I think as it should be. But the other what's the other option?
Well,
print money.
Some of the Republicans have
Right?
suggested in the new group that they would be willing to accept a gas tax increase, which apparently the Biden administration doesn't want to do because people with less than $400,000 a year have to buy gas, and that would violate his pledge that people under $400,000 a year. He's already violated that pledge in several things he wants to do, but
this would be an obvious violation that they could get him on.
Well, let's take a break. Let me first of all say that if you'd like to join the conversation, we'll eventually move past the economic issues, but if though something we've talked about in the last half hour is of interest to you, give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. When we come back, I do want to ask a question because Dr. Merrill Matthews, sometimes we talk about you when you're not here. And a week ago, we talked about the fact that Janet Yellen was traveling around trying to convince these other countries to have at least a kind of a global minimum corporate tax. It didn't work out so well, but you've been talking about that whole issue, and I thought we'd come back to that as well, because you can imagine that if indeed President Joe Biden gets a corporate tax of, say, 28%, and the corporate tax in, say, Ireland is 12.5%, think about what you might do if you're a company. I'll give you enough time to think it through, but I think you've probably figured out what you would do. It's called inversion. So we'll talk about some of that with Dr. Merrill Matthews right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join the phone conversation. And again, we already have a number of people on the line, so we will get to those in just a minute. That number is 1-800-351-1212. Penna, Dexter, Dr. Merrill Matthews. And as a matter of fact, a couple of issues. Number one, this idea of corporate tax, the so-called race to the bottom, because if the corporate income tax ends up being 28% or even 21%, and you can pay a corporate income tax in Ireland at 12.5%, or El Salvador's been in the news lately, and you decide because they go to Bitcoin that you don't have to pay any corporate income tax at all, you get these inversions. But I can see some of the callers want to also talk about something else we mentioned earlier in the week, because we now have the tax forms for many of these billionaires, and we found out that whether it's Elon Musk or whether it's Jeff Bezos or a number of others,
Michael Bloomberg's in there.
They paid no taxes certain years. So what about this?
Well, on the corporate tax rate, and what's happened there is that the United States has managed to convince the G7 countries, the finance ministers, to try to go to a 15%, I think, global corporate tax rate, minimum corporate tax rate. So if a corporation comes up and they don't have any taxes, they would end up having to pay 15%. Their next step is to try to get the G20 countries to sign on board.
Good luck.
My guess is that's going to be a harder sell, but they did get the G7 to sign on board. And what they're trying to do is they're concerned that many companies, and I saw a couple of weeks ago, Joe Biden said he'd be willing, in negotiating with Republicans, to keep the 21% U.S. corporate tax rate at 21% instead of going back up to 28%, which is what he said he'd be willing, if they'll sign on to the global corporate tax rate. Which the Republicans I understand. Well, I won't say what I understand them saying.
Yes.
We're in a corporate tax rate fight here. Many wealthy people don't. And ProPublica released this information of a handful of very, very wealthy people, almost all Democrats, as I believe so far.
I'm glad you pointed that out.
We'll find out if there are going to be more of them, but it was almost all Democrats, and these are big Democratic donors. I find that interesting. But what ProPublica did not say is they were doing anything illegal.
No.
And so what happens is when you get a complicated tax system, you also get lots of ability to be able to manipulate this, use that legally, some cases illegally, but generally legally, to lower your corporate taxes. So what we'd like to see is a flat corporate tax, or maybe a national sales tax. I think probably the more likely is a flat tax out there, which eliminates all of these deductions. And here's your income, here's your rate, period. So if you do that, you get rid of a lot of those problems, and then higher income people have to end up paying the tax also.
Yeah, you broaden out the tax base so that everyone has a stake and pays it. So when this came out, this was in the Washington Post as a columnist, Megan McArdle, who's, she's kind of in the middle.
But she's a reasonable person.
Center left. She's reasonable. She said that it sounds like a loophole, but in fact, that's how everyone's taxes work. Ordinary Americans don't pay income tax every time our stock portfolios go up or our homes appreciate a bit.
Right.
We pay the tax when we sell. Why should American billionaires be different? The reason I think that this is a big deal right now, and maybe somehow coordinated with the efforts on the part of Democrats to pass these big spending bills, is because Elizabeth Warren has all along promoted a wealth tax, and most people just can't stand the idea of it. I can't. But in order to get a lot of money coming in, that would be a good way for them to get money for their spending. So instead of, it's a big difference between income and wealth.
Right.
People that have a lot of money and they own stocks, they own properties, these things appreciate, and when you sell it, you pay the tax. But, a lot of this is because people are, as you said, abiding by the tax rules that are perfectly legal, and they're not paying the tax until they dispose of the property. And so, it's not a real big news story coming out of ProPublica, but it is being, I think it's a way to manipulate public opinion. And to get people to support something like a wealth tax, it's just not fair that these billionaires don't have to pay as much tax as other people.
Right, and I agree with you completely. Yeah. I think it is a ploy to try to sort of make the ability to sell a wealth tax or else other taxes more palatable to the public and to the Republicans.
And why should we not be surprised that this is happening with the promises that have been made by this president?
Mm-hmm. And again, you said it was probably coordinated. I think so, because if you saw the opening hearing by Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon, the announcement came earlier that morning, and he reads it from the committee meeting and starts the committee meeting with that. And again, it's a tax not on income, it's a tax on wealth. And anybody that owns stock, even if you say, I'm not a stockholder, do you have a 401k? Do you have an IRA? Do you have any kind of investment? Yes, you do. And so those capital gains come when you sell them, and that could change everything with a wealth tax.
The general problem with the wealth tax is actually figuring out how much something is worth, and it may not be constitutional. There are people who argue it is not constitutional.
Because if it goes up, it's one, but it could go down
right.
too.
So if you had a lot of money and you bought in and put all that money in the stock market in January of 2020, or maybe December, so you end up, they look at it and the IRS says this is how much you owe by end of March 2020. You may have been a poor person because the stock market went down so much. And just figuring out land values, how much that land value is, how much the stocks are when it goes up and down. So the problem with the wealth tax is trying to figure out how much wealth people have, because they have many. You may just go out and buy a really nice painting that cost a lot of money and you have it in your house. Is that an investment that you're going to have to pay a wealth tax on?
Or a piece of jewelry.
You'd have to have a whole bureaucracy. It reminds me of the conversations Penna and I used to have about comparable worth. You'd have to have a whole bureaucracy to figure out a person's wealth worth in terms of their paychecks and all those kinds of things. Same thing, you'd have to do this for wealth, and it just wouldn't make any sense. But let's take some phone calls, because one of the questions was about these billionaires not paying taxes. So Marcella in Georgia, WLPE, thank you for joining us today.
Greetings, sir. It's a good day.
Very good. What would you like to ask?
And I was asking. I was wondering. Last 2-3 days, they've been talking a lot about the billionaires and how they're not doing this and they're not doing that. Meanwhile, us regular people are fighting for toilet paper and getting kicked at the pump. So to speak. And then there's Biden, they're talking about the money here, and they are donating, I guess, for the inoculations. I guess that's a good, I think that's a good thing. But what's supposed to happen to us regular people?
Yeah, good question. Some people say, Penna, that it's not fair that they have that kind of wealth, and they are able, by using the tax code and by having various kinds of lobbyists. Robert Reich was saying, they are able to do this because they have lobbyists. And maybe the answer is a flat tax, because this argument of paying your fair share is something that I think is sometimes a campaign slogan. But there does strike people as certainly Elon Musk and some of these other individuals probably have enough resources that they could at least help continue to build the infrastructure of America.
Yeah. I mean, I do think, and I think that should be how the infrastructure is built, by private companies, not the federal government. But on regular people, yes, a flatter tax, or perhaps a national sales tax. I sort of have always liked the flat tax.
Me too.
Would then, everyone would have a stake, everyone would pay, and it would be according to your income. It sounds very fair. I don't know why we have to be so complex. We are very, very, very complex in our tax code. It just gives me an ulcer practically thinking about it. But, if you turn this into a country where the rich are taxed and taxed and taxed, and they have to really basically support that, and then everybody else, and a lot of people get this guaranteed income, don't work, you begin enslaving a whole class of people. So the regular people, some of them might love all the transfer payments and take a lot of advantage of them, But really, it's freeing to have a job, to be able to provide for your family, to be able to improve your lot. It's not freeing to be completely dependent on the government and on a handout. And, that's maybe a negative term, but only when people can provide for themselves are they truly free. So we don't want to enslave people either. The rhetoric right now, I think, is going to take us down a very bad road if we follow it. And it's going to be a road where nobody is doing as well as they are now. In fact, a lot of people will be doing a lot worse.
Well, we'll come back and talk a little bit more about that. There were some that used to say you got too many people in the wagon and not enough people pulling it. And that's one way to look at it. But there are some other topics we can address. We will do so right after this.
June used to be Gay Pride Month. Now it's LGBTQ Pride Month, or simply Pride Month. Really, though, there's no special month needed. The T, the transgender push, is marketed to kids and young adults all year long. However, every June we see an uptick, and this month is no exception, as iconic corporations roll out special products to celebrate Pride Month. There's an LGBTQ Lego set. A tweet from the Lego group says the playsets were developed to ensure our future builders are accepting of everyone. Disney is offering the Rainbow Disney Collection. One of the items is a stuffed Mickey Mouse wearing rainbow-colored shorts. The Daily Signal's cultural commentator Nicole Russell says, pushing gender and sex on kids is not only inappropriate, but also unrelated to, indeed antithetical to, the magic, wonder, and innocence of childhood the Disney brand purports to embody. Mars Wrigley has released limited edition Skittles Pride Packs with all-gray candies and all-gray packaging that says, only one rainbow matters. A share of the profit on each package goes to the LGBT advocacy group GLAAD. Because boxes are for cereal, not for people, Kellogg's is also partnering with GLAAD to offer a Together with Pride-themed cereal. I repeat, the kids who are the targets of these marketing campaigns are for the most part too young to care or even be thinking about sex or gender identity. But there's a different sort of marketing that targets older kids and teens online. Transgender YouTube personalities and celebrities are given prominence. Gender transition is touted as the answer to emotional struggles. In an essay for the Claremont Institute, Mary Eberstadt describes how teens, especially girls, are drawn in through videos posted by trans tastemakers who document their gender transitions, and by the accolades that accrue to a teen who comes out online. She says corrupt doctors, politicians, merchants, and others who are stoking this trans kid craze must answer for it. We must make them. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, 1-800-351-1212. It is Weekend Edition. Penna Dexter, Dr. Merrill Matthews. And again, we had some questions about everything from billionaires to a wealth tax. Any thoughts?
Well, one of the things I'll mention is that some of these billionaires give a lot of their money away. And, Warren Buffett, I believe, has sort of decided with Bill Gates and two or three others, they were going to give away billions of dollars. They made sort of a compact, and they were going to start doing that. And Bill Gates, my goodness, has given away millions of dollars to help fight polio and other places and so forth. I believe I may have read he's going to provide some money for vaccines in other places. So they do that. Number two, they make good salaries, but for most of these people, the real income for them is the stock that they get at some point, and that stock explodes, and that stock is worth an awful lot of money, and that's where the real wealth is. It's not necessary. They're making a lot of money,
yes,
but the real wealth is sitting in the stock market there because they're the companies and so you take like Jeff Bezos, he's made a lot of money, but my goodness, Amazon has done a lot for this country in terms of changing the way things occur and so forth. I mean, people buying online now, able to go on and find things they want. They don't even have to go out of their house to buy it. So a lot of them have brought value to the country as well. So I understand the concerns about the billionaires and not paying taxes. On the other hand, they give money away. A lot of this is stock, which they will end up having to pay taxes on at some point. And of course, they've brought a lot of value to the country.
Well, if you want more of something, then don't tax it. If you want less of something, tax it. Do we really want to disincentivize innovation? Mm-hmm. You just mentioned Jeff Bezos, but all sorts of things being invented. And do you really want to disincentivize people risking their money to start the company in the first place with really no guarantee that they're going to end up successful? But, people all across America are starting companies. They're risking their capital. They're borrowing from their, relatives or whatever to start businesses. And if you're successful and the government's going to take a bigger and bigger chunk of that in the form of a wealth tax, make you pay every year as your house goes up, as your stock goes up.
Yeah.
I mean, it turns into a nightmare. And really people will say, well, let me just take the government handout and I will live a different way.
I know. And of course, I've had a lot of small business people say, look, I spent years eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch and ramen noodles for dinner. And then finally, I got to a point where I was making a six-figure income, and now they're taxing me. But what about all the years in which I was living basically in almost abject poverty? Yeah. And I know individuals that have been in businesses for years and have never taken a salary. They've been dependent on their spouse to provide enough income for them to exist. And then as soon as they hit something that's successful, then this federal government swoops in and wants to take all of their profits.
To build on what Penna said, I believe one of the most inspiring shows out there is Shark Tank.
Oh,
because
yes.
you get people in there, and some of these people have done okay in the past, but many of them are just average Americans who had an idea. They started something. They put their own money in it. They maybe borrowed some money from parents and relatives and others and so forth. And it's just inspiring to see some of these ideas they come up with, and many of them end up. I mean, we're looking at sometime in the Shark Tank that was aired 3 or 4 years ago, and we see that product out there is in the store right now. And some of these people have done very, very well with this simply by putting their own innovation, expertise, and inspiration and perspiration into these ideas.
Sweat equity, we call it. And again, where's all the innovation taking place? Well, it's in places like the United States, in Israel, and a few others. And look at the lack of innovation in some of these high-tax countries. So, okay, we got a few more phone calls. I'll just take one more before the top of the hour. Since we stayed in the area of economics, we'll go to South Carolina this time. WAGP and Sherry, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. I have a question about listening to the inflation possibly coming up with our stocks and bonds in our joint account with Vanguard. Is it better? I feel like it's paper money and not really doing any good for the kingdom. And maybe taking some out for supporting ministries and doing some repairs. But then, of course, there's taxes. But we want to be good stewards. So how do we deal with that? I hate to see it stay in there and then just go down and not use it as we should.
Well, first of all, I'm not a financial analyst, and I don't claim to give financial advice, but I do want to say something that I'm sure a lot of listeners are thinking about right now, and that is if you give appreciated stock to a ministry, then you don't have to pay the capital gains on it. So the ministry benefits from it, and you don't have to pay any kind of capital gains. So if you had stock, whatever it might be, since we've been talking about vaccines, let's say you had Pfizer stock and it's appreciated dramatically, if you cash it out, out, then you have to pay all the capital gains, and then you can give less to that ministry. But if you can give the stock to the ministry, and they've done that for Point of View, and I know they've done it for First Liberty, and I'm sure they've done it for IPI.org and all the rest, that then they get the benefit, and you don't have to pay the taxes.
And Kerby, do you know if the nonprofit takes the stock and then sells it, they don't have to pay taxes on it?
That is correct. Yeah, because they're a nonprofit tax-exempt 501c3 organization. Right. So go ahead, Penna.
Well, let me just add something else, and that is if you do have a portfolio where you're investing in companies, there are people that can help you to find the companies that are doing the things that are important to you to invest in. So you could invest in companies that, some people want to invest green, for instance. And I mean, now it's like if a company's not green, then most financial advisors aren't even going to recommend it. But there are people that will say, okay, this company's doing this that you like, that's for the free market, that's for the country. Invest there. So you still, you want to have a portfolio getting ready for your retirement. You want to have investments. But if you find the places to invest that are sort of go along with your values, that's a good thing. The other thing is of course, everyone has to look at what they are given and see what portion of that God would have you actually give away outright. And
Sherry's point, I think, is a lot of people may be thinking about right now, especially Christians. If they had money in the stock market and that stock is significantly higher than it was at some point in the past, they may say, we feel like we've got, we have a pension coming in when we retire or something. We feel like we have some additional money that we could share through a prayerful sort of a sense of where, Lord, would you like me to distribute this money? And then following Kerby's idea of passing over the stock, it's a good time to be able to help some people.
Yes, and I do know of various ministries, since not only this one, but I sit on the board of others, that over the years have been able to get stock, and they usually have somebody then that then sells the stock, and the ministry benefits. You don't have to pay taxes. Penna mentioned something in passing, too, because if you say, I want to give to something and make sure my money doesn't go to something I disagree with. For example, we've had O.S. Hawkins on here of Guidestone, and they make sure that none of the material they invest in is alcohol, tobacco, pornography, drugs, those kinds of things. So there are some places to make sure that you're using the financial resources God has placed in your hand in a way that advances the kingdom. So, Sherry, very good question. And, we spent a little more time on economics, but I got a feeling we're going to be doing more of that just because of the fact that the monetary inflation means that these dollars that we have right now are going to be worth less in the future. And at the same time, those dollars are showing up in things like the stock market. It's just been shooting up like this. And so that means if you're wealthy and you have a lot of assets, you're doing real well. But if inflation's taking place and you're middle income or lower income, you're doing poorly because those dollars are worth less. And so the wage gap is going to get worse and worse if we don't figure out some ways to change it around. Now, of course, the president will always blame the Republicans on that, but I think the really blame, if it goes anywhere, goes back to things like the Federal Reserve and too much government spending. But let's take a break, and we have a lot more issues. We've only talked about inflation. We've got to get another eye. How about immigration? We'll get to that and what's going on the border. And then we have a couple of other stories. Especially, I want to get Dr. Merrill Matthews to talk about the canceling the Keystone Pipeline. What does that mean in terms of energy? So we've got many more topics on the table. We'll get to those right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Weekend edition, Penna, Dexter, Dr. Merrill Matthews. I might just mention he is with IPI.org, which is the Institute for Policy Innovation. If you go there right now, you're going to see everything from broadband access to whether or not to have vaccine passports. Of course, we've already talked about the so-called major tax scandal and backdoor scheme to effectively raising the minimum wage. And then another one on Have Gun, Will Vote, which maybe we'll get to later, because it's interesting that one writer for the LA Times says she actually wants gun ownership to be listed on real estate so people can determine whether or not their neighbors have guns. And I'm thinking, okay, we'll get into that later. But we did talk about the I's. One of them was inflation. But I did want to talk about immigration, if for no other reason than because the mainstream media just has been ignoring this issue. And, of course, it couldn't ignore it when then it was a decision by President Joe Biden to send Vice President Kamala Harris to Latin America. So, and we've also had this interesting interview she did with Lester Holt. So, Penna, Dexter, what's your thoughts?
Well, first of all, he gave it to her as a piece of her portfolio that she's in charge of dealing with the border, in a sense. And so, and it took a long time for her to go anywhere. And she finally did. She
I have an idea it's going to take a longer time for her to go anywhere else.
Probably. That didn't work out all that well. But, you know, in a sense, he gave it to her, but then it seems like he sort of pulled back on, I don't know, the scope of her duties. And it just kind of, I don't know, in one sense, shows me that she wasn't the best person for this. She doesn't really have experience in these issues, and she hasn't shown herself to be able to step up to the plate at all. And so, you know, there's this one piece by Jim Garrity from National Review, how Joe Biden is hanging Kamala Harris out to dry. And it's pretty funny. Well, not funny, but we kind of thought that she was going to be the real president and that he was, you know, not really
now we
capable.
Don't have one.
And so, yeah,
Boy, that's really wrong.
But that has not happened at
there
all.
There are now people saying, we hope that Joe Biden will make his way through the 4 years. It's just, I've never seen something like this before.
I haven't either. It's just been, in a sense, embarrassing in a way, but also, you know, why did you think that the person that dropped out of the primaries first, or practically first, was going to be the best person to make vice president? I mean, she really, I don't know who's holding all the strings for Biden right now, because
Maybe
it's
Susan
not her.
Rice.
It's not her.
Yeah, I don't know. And that's a good point, because this was a choice because of intersectionality, wouldn't you say? Because once he said, I have to have an African-American woman, well, that narrowed it down pretty quickly. And there you are. But Dr. Merrill Matthews, you've been in Washington, D.C. You've testified in congressional committees. You've interacted with people in politics for a long time, as all of us have, but you certainly have spent some time there. I don't ever think I've had a vice president which we probably have less confidence in, even thinking of Dan Quayle and people like that. This is something which I didn't see coming, but that's exactly what's being played out right now, that people wonder whether or not she is competent to be the vice president of the United States.
Right. I suspect a lot of churches are starting to pray for the health of Joe Biden so that he manages to make the 4 years, because it has not looked good so far. Now, sometimes somebody kind of grows into an office and becomes better as as time goes on, or at least their handlers get to where they start handling them better. But remember, when Bill Clinton came in, the first 4 or 5 months of Bill Clinton in the White House was just a mess. Remember, his Surgeon General was making certain stuff, all kinds of things were going on, and it was he ended up bringing in David Gergen, who was a Republican advisor in May of 1993, I believe it was, to try to help settle things down because the Bill Clinton White House was becoming a laughingstock around the world. Yeah. And Bill managed to settle down a little bit, and, well, in some ways. And
don't push that too far.
Things at least looked less tumultuous, even if they were. So, at any rate, maybe she will improve a little bit and grow into the office, but so far it is not looking good.
You know, there's this good article about the root causes of the migrant crisis, and the argument has always been that you're going to find the root causes in Guatemala, in Mexico, the Northern Triangle. I don't know, Penna, but it sure seems to me that the root causes are telling people that they can actually get across the border and that they will probably get citizenship sooner, if not later. And that has been the reason, because when you say, well, it's poverty in some of these countries, poverty has existed for some time. They might say, well, there's violence in these countries. Violence has been there for some time. We're setting an all-time record for the number of people crossing the border, aren't we?
Yes. And, you know, one would think that if you're going to give someone a responsibility, it is an absolute crisis and emergency.
They can't call it a crisis.
Yeah,
but they won't. And that's the reason they, instead of going and dealing, you know, kind of figuring out how to deal with it better at the border, because that's where the problems are. And there are a lot of people being hurt. Their property is being destroyed. They don't feel safe. They're moving away from border towns because it's so bad there. But that's not it. She went to Guatemala. She's looking for the root causes. And then, you know, when you want to ask about the root causes, the Guatemalan president, which she went to Guatemala, he said on Sunday that the reason that we're having the problem is because the Biden administration has sent a more welcoming message to Central American migrants by vowing to reunite families and children with their relatives in America. So people are going because they think that things are going to be, you know, better for them by coming. He said the very next day after the Biden administration sent that message out early on, this is in his administration, the Coyotes were here in Guatemala organizing groups of children to take them to the United States. So, you know, Biden's words mean something. And that is a big part and parcel of why we have the problem at the border. We didn't have it when he took office. Things were very calm. President Trump's policies were working. And it's all because of what they did in changing everything from day one.
I'm surprised. I've been looking for the meme where it's Kamala Harris saying the border is closed, and then you have an eye going wink, 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 wink. Yeah. The border is closed, wink, 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 wink. Yeah. Because everybody there knows the border isn't closed.
That's right.
Now they may turn them back in some ways, but if you go down the river a little ways, you may be able to get across there. They've made it very clear that their preference is to be able to take care of children who come across. They want to take care. They don't want to split families now, so they were sending children. I think now it's children and families. So the people pick up on the messages, not what they say, but what they do.
So maybe it would be possible for a governor of a state to actually decide to build a wall. Is that a possibility? Yeah, I think we're going to talk about that after the break and illustrate again how the media also does not cover this because there's still kids in cages and there's still parents being separated from their kids, but you wouldn't know it by watching what's been called the mainstream media. So we're going to come back and talk about the fact that Governor Greg Abbott of Texas says, if you're not going to build a wall, I'll build a wall. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
President Biden wants to raise taxes. His plan is to repeal and replace the Trump tax cuts, which not only will affect corporations, but your income tax liability. So let me give you a brief history in order to put some of this into perspective. After the Civil War, nearly all taxes were repealed, and the federal government relied mostly on tariffs for revenues. This income was more than enough to run the government and generated significant surpluses. The problem is the tariffs are essentially a consumption tax that is regressive and adversely affects the poor. This created political pressure to institute an income tax on the rich. President Grover Cleveland and the Democratic majorities in both houses of Congress passed an income tax that affected only the wealthiest 1% of Americans. The tax was attacked in the court because it represented a direct tax, which the Constitution requires to be apportioned equally among the states. This was not the case and led to the Supreme Court striking down the law. After that decision, pressure grew to tax incomes on the largely untaxed rich. President William Howard Taft proposed a constitutional amendment to legalize a personal income tax while also imposing a tax on corporate profits as a stopgap measure. By 1913, the 16th Amendment was ratified. President Woodrow Wilson promptly passed a personal income tax, and the corporate income tax was intended to be a stopgap but was left in place and has often been used by the rich to play one tax against the other. When you look at the history of taxation in this country, you can see that the problem isn't that Americans are undertaxed, but that government is overspent. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you hear on Viewpoints by visiting pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, we might talk about immigration for just another minute or two, and then we'll move on to some other topics. But when you talk about the border, there have been people like Senator Ted Cruz and a variety of other members of Congress that have actually gone to the border, sometimes have been looking across, and you can see the coyotes and others marching there or trying to set up or trying to figure out, using some drones that they have, where the Border Patrol might be and figuring out how to cross it. And then you've seen there have been a number of individuals have gone to a fence, and then there's a gap because they were going to fill in the gap. It does seem to me right now that Governor Greg Abbott's saying, if there's a gap, I know what to do. Let's just build that fence and make it much more difficult for people to come into this country.
You know, I saw what he said last night, and I was glad to hear that. On the other hand, I wonder, remember when Texas was upset about border policies under the Obama administration and was trying to do something? The Obama administration came back and said, immigration is a federal issue. It is not a state issue. The feds handle immigration. So I just wonder, I have not heard anybody step up and say you can't build a wall if the federal government doesn't want you to because you're affecting immigration. But we'll see if this ends up in the court somehow.
Yeah, and you remember the ruling out of Arizona that sort of implied that could be the case. But we will see, because I'd love to see a battle between the state and the federal government on an issue of national security, right?
Right.
So anyway, go ahead.
And I was just going to say, it would be interesting to see if Governor Abbott starts to build the wall, if the feds come in and try to stop them from doing it. Mm-hmm. And then you have the pictures and so forth. And of course, the kids that came here, if I remember right, they're no longer under Department of Homeland Security. They're now under CMS, HHS, the Department of Health and Human Services. And once that happened, the media seemed to lose any interest in the kids. So they have not all gone back. They've just been shuffled around the country into other places under HHS, I believe.
Yeah, and I saw one of these liberal commentators, and I don't encourage you to read too many of them, but I do just so that you don't, saying, liberal media, are you unaware of the fact that most of these families are still not reunited after all this time, and we still have kids in cages and all the things that we heard about when Donald Trump was the president, and now there was an article the other day that actually said, what border crisis? I haven't heard anybody talking about that. Well, first of all, they haven't been watching various news stories, and they probably haven't even been reading their own Washington Post newspaper, but it's still a crisis, and that's why we talk about it from time to time.
Yes, and the other part of it is, as I mentioned before, just the people that are affected on the American side of the border that live there, that own property. Josh Trevino of Texas Public Policy Foundation has been documenting story after story, and just business owners or ranchers or people that live in the towns nearby who don't feel safe anymore, who have seen some people have said that their homes are just, people would just enter their homes and grab food and water. They're desperate, so they don't want to deprive these people of something like that. But it becomes a more than a nuisance. It becomes dangerous because you don't know what kind of people are with them or behind them, and so it's something that the state government of the border states, Texas, Arizona, whatever. I mean, it's common sense that they should be able to do something about it. But I have no question that they'll be sued. I'm sure that the state of Texas will be sued for doing anything.
Well, we'll just keep covering it. Well, I want to get into some other issues, and one of those, and this is probably one of the saddest ones that we've posted here, the Keystone XL pipeline canceled. Now, we recognize that when, of course, President Joe Biden came into office, that some of that was going to happen anyway, but there's more than the pipeline that goes through the United States. And now what you have is a foregone conclusion that people whose livelihoods, whether they were building the pipeline, whether they were welders, whether they were hotel managers that had people staying there, and a variety of others, all because of almost a snap decision, had their livelihoods destroyed. And so, Penna, I posted that article because I wanted people to maybe just understand that there's a lot more at stake than just the pipeline or energy. It's people's lives that are affected by this.
Yeah, it was an $8 billion project, and Trump, I think it was about a year into his presidency, approved there's just permits that need to be issued and approvals at different parts. And I'm sure that Buddy can give us a lot more on that, but he did approve it. And so then different places along the pipeline began gearing up, and people began, getting their livelihoods from working on the pipeline. And then Trump walked in, and this involves Canada and the United States. Trump walked in, and Biden walked in and just canceled some of the permits. And so now the Canadian company that was doing this, TC Energy, they pulled the plug on it. It just became, I guess, impossible for them to financially do. So they pulled the plug. And it's because of these, it was kind of like a football back and forth. But, once we had given it that many years, it just seems really terrible for Biden to then pull the plug on it.
And the strange thing is, we're talking about the Keystone XL, but the Keystone Pipeline, which is the same company, has been up and running for about a decade.
For sure.
In the exact same place, going across Canada, comes down through North Dakota into Nebraska, and then over to Illinois to be refined. And then they added phases to the Keystone Pipeline, which went to Oklahoma and now down into the Gulf Coast. And President Obama went to Cushing, Oklahoma, to announce the opening of that phase 3 or 4 of the pipeline, which and how great this was going to be. Even as the Obama administration was pushing back on the XL, which was just simply one more pipeline starting the same place from the same company, and then instead of going across Canada and down through North Dakota, it was going to go through Montana and into Nebraska to pick up gasoline from oil from the Bakken Shale in Montana. Right. So I've always been puzzled by this because we've been processing this same heavy crude
this for a decade.
Yeah,
I know.
And this was just going to be another one that was going to bring some more in. And yet it became an issue in the Hillary Clinton, and when she was Secretary of State, said, yeah, I think I'll probably approve this. When it became an issue and she was running for president, she said, no, we'll absolutely stop this. Obama generally stopped it. Donald Trump came in and opened it back up so that the Keystone XL could move forward, and now Joe Biden come in and shut it down. And this is part of a broader issue that the environmentalists are trying to stop pipeline creation, so that with the idea if we can't get oil and natural gas to the refineries through the pipelines, that will actually slow our ability to be able to create fossil fuels and sell them out there. So that's become their new target.
Right, certainly, because they're talking about another pipeline.
It's really a sort of a virtue signal.
Oh, yes.
For sure.
Yeah. And the problem is they'll just take the oil or gas and ship it by rail or other ways.
Which is more dangerous.
Which is more dangerous and more expensive.
Yeah. Because everybody probably knows I love trains, but I also recognize that shipping them on trains is more dangerous and more environmentally risky than shipping them in a pipeline. So there you go, if they're going to do that. But a lot of it has to do with kind of the Green New Deal, right?
Yes. And I saw something that came out this week. I can't remember where it was from. But, a lot of people were saying, well, under COVID, we weren't going to be creating as much climate change or global warming because the economy is shut down. But then when they went back and studied it, it really didn't affect the emissions of greenhouse.
Yeah, it was a small effect, but not huge.
Yeah, it didn't do any good. I mean, the environmentalists were cheering and saying this is the way we need to live all the time. But it really didn't. It didn't affect it that much. And that's the truth. It will not affect the environment we shut down fossil fuels.
The best thing we've done is transition to natural gas for electricity generation, and that has dramatically reduced our carbon emissions. So if you want to do that, that's a good way to go, but the left doesn't like that either.
Which country so far has reduced carbon emissions more than any other country?
I bet us.
Yeah, United States. That's right. And that, again, if you ask 100 people out there, I doubt that more than 2 or 3 of them would get that answer, and yet that is the case. We need to take a break. When we come back, one of the other articles we've been waiting till now, how 5 media lies won Biden the White House. And it turns out that some of these stories are only now being surfaced. Of course, we've been talking about the leak of the Wuhan lab, but even the idea of clearing Lafayette Park, all that is the case. And lo and behold, I might bring this one in as another one, a new study coming out saying hydroxychloroquine actually might have been fairly successful, but everybody said it wasn't, if for no other reason than because Donald Trump said that it would be successful. So we are learning after the fact that maybe a few times, I know this will shock you, the press did not cover Donald Trump accurately. So we'll talk about some of that right after these important messages.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna, Dexter, Dr. Merrill Matthews. And the fourth article here is one I do commend to you. Whether you supported Donald Trump or not, whether you liked his presidency or couldn't wait for him to leave, there has been so much false reporting of Donald Trump, which I think is unfortunate, no matter what you happen to think about with him. And so Larry O'Connor talks about how 5 media lies won Biden Biden the White House. And this is, I think, one aspect of this. If I could add to this something that's in my media bias, our booklet that we've made available, the Media Research Center went back and asked some of the people that voted for Joe Biden in some of these swing states, were they aware of these 8 different stories, 5 of which were somewhat supportive for the Biden administration, for the, if you will, the Trump administration, 3 that were somewhat critical of the Biden administration. They found that many of them did not know most of those stories, and at least 17% of them actually said that if they had known about those stories, they might have voted differently. And if that's the case, then Donald Trump would have gotten 311 electoral votes instead of the 270 necessary. So in some cases, the media, when they have not done their job or when they've engaged in false reporting, do affect elections. And this is another very important study that Larry O'Connor is just sort of summarizing. The most recent one, finding out that when they cleared Lafayette Park, the so-called federal stormtroopers, that wasn't initiated by the Trump administration. So, Penna, this piece I wanted people to read because it is one more illustration for why we need to have discernment when we watch or read or even take some time to find out what the media is saying, because in some cases they haven't been telling the truth.
Yeah, I mean, I recommend, since there's so much media available, that people, just read all sides of an issue. I mean, if you're a conservative, you're going to read mostly conservative media. If you don't care, you're probably going to be reading the liberal media most of the time, because it's just easier to get. But I think this piece is from Town Hall, and it's posted at pointofview.net. I think everybody should read it. If you don't read any of the other articles from today, this one you should. And give it to your friends. But, I think the big story, the number one they put first, is the Wuhan lab leak. And, Tom Cotton, the senator, and Donald Trump, they brought this up at the beginning, saying, could this possibly have been a leak from the lab and not something coming from a bat for the Chinese wet markets? And I never understood why this was not taken more seriously. Because we could have looked into it, but it wasn't. And just until recently, and there was something published recently about 3 lab workers who had a similar illness, and right at that time, and they worked in the lab. And so obviously, if that's not the reason, it's a huge possibility for being the reason, and definitely merited some serious attention. And as a matter of fact, I think there will be legislation, and there will be intelligence information coming out. But that's number one. So I'll let you go and do another one, buddy.
Well, I agree with you. And my first response was, there's only 5.
Yeah, really.
Well, they actually said there's 14, but I just these 5 on the power. Yeah,
but remember, right off the bat, there was the story that Donald Trump had taken the bust of Martin Luther King down in the Oval Office, if I remember right. And when you went back, Kelly Conway said he was right here. You didn't see it because I was standing in front of it, or something of that nature. Donald Trump said, I think they may be monitoring me at the Trump Tower. Remember and turns out there was something to that.
Yes.
There were so many instances in which Trump made a claim that I would have thought at the time, that's a little odd. Why would you have done something? Why are you even thinking that? And you come out and you find out, if it wasn't exactly right, it was at least pretty close to being right in some cases. And the Wuhan thing, it was just, you have their major virology institute there in Wuhan. A virus gets out, and it would make sense that you would at least say, that's at least a possibility. But what the media did was they went full bore attack on Trump for even thinking this. And I still remember listening to an NPR story where the reporter came out and said Trump's racist statement of calling this the Chinese flu, or the Chinese Wuhan flu, or something like that, wasn't racist. That's where it started. The media has lost, in my opinion, the mainstream media, almost all credibility. I just discount almost everything they say these days because it is so biased in their own thinking.
One of the other ones was the vaccines, because throughout COVID, President Trump promised a vaccine, and he got the ball rolling very quickly.
Absolutely did.
And then, even I, thought, well, maybe a little bit after the first of the year we'll get it. Well, it was actually available before the end of 2020. And, exactly what he promised, and plus the distribution of it has been incredible. And so, you have a little, maybe a bump along the way, but to get as many people vaccinated now as we have is just an incredible feat.
Two others that are here, since we're talking about those, a good illustration that Dr. Merrill Matthews was talking about. I don't trust him. Well, I certainly don't trust him when we have anonymous sources,
right?
Where nobody is on the record. And two of those are the so-called Russian bounties. It was reported that President Trump had been informed that Russia had offered bounties to Taliban militants for any troop that they killed. And that one, of course, was completely made up. I'm not even sure there's even any evidence that had been reported. And then the other one that Donald Trump mocked the war dead. Remember that one? These were losers and all that kind of stuff. And then when you would go to all of the individuals that say, I was there, he didn't say this, whether it's Kayleigh McEnany, whether it's Mike Pompeo, nobody's saying, no, that did not happen. Even people that weren't even necessarily pro-Trump are saying it didn't happen. The press just kept bringing it out again and again and again and would never let it go, because they then had a media narrative that they would simply continue to repeat.
Right. They were inclined to believe anything that was bad about Trump, and they would run with it, and they'd jump on it and cover it immediately. They are with Joe Biden. They're inclined to dismiss anything that bad about Biden, and then they're not going to cover it, and they'll wait until they can't sort of ignore it any longer. And you just have that sort of differing opinion there.
What about the future of Donald Trump? Some people have been asking. So just before we take a break, Peter Roth sent this to me. He's actually wrote this in Newsweek, and he said there are certain words one never associates with a former president, and one of them is coy. Yet he has been very coy about whether or not he'd run for president in 2024. Well, I'll spare you the very lengthy piece in which he talks about pro and con, how some of this is vindicating the president, but he simply at the end says there's a problem. The president still former president seems to be spending a lot of time trying to explain why he lost in 2020, and so wanting to be vindicated. And he says if Trump wants to be the next Republican presidential nominee, he needs to talk more about what he'll do to win in 2024 than why he lost in 2020. He says the chances of that happening, say many Republican insiders, is minimal. But what about that? Everybody seems to be asking Donald Trump, are you going to run in 2024? And I'd love to hear your thoughts.
My guess is he will leave the door open, that he might do it for months and months. But I would put the scales, I'd tip it just a little bit towards he won't run.
Yes, I would agree.
I wouldn't say he's not going to run, but I think on balance, he probably won't run, but he won't close that door specifically, which creates all kinds of problems for people who want to challenge him. If you're Mike Pence, Ron DeSantis, or some of those others, and you're going to kind of wait until you see if he's actually going to run, it keeps you from actually jumping in as soon as you might otherwise would.
And when there's a question mark, I was thinking of Sarah Palin. For a long time, we didn't know if she was going to run, having been the vice presidential nominee. By keeping that question mark, you're relevant. As soon as you say you're not running, maybe that's another part of that. I don't know.
Yeah, I think Donald Trump, it's too bad if he spends all of this time, whether he's running or not, trying to vindicate himself. If he would amass a group, maybe of key advisors, maybe Russell Vogt, that type of group that he's forming, or some other idea factories that would give some good ideas for a run for the White House. And then whether or not Trump runs, at least you have those ideas out there and you have sort of a Contact for America or whatever, some kind of a platform. If President Trump doesn't do that, then I'm very skeptical on whether he could be successful. because I don't think he can just go back on recriminations for 4 years.
Of course, he's created the America First think tank. We don't know where that's going to go or how well that's going to work, but he has he's taken a step that direction, I think.
And so we'll see what happens with Governor Ron DeSantis and Senator Tim Scott and a long, long list of
Nikki
individuals
Haley,
might run or might not. So anyway, we will leave that there. But Penna Dexter's commentary right now on Pride Month. Got to talk about Pride Month, and we will do that right after this.
June used to be Gay Pride Month. Now it's LGBTQ Pride Month, or simply Pride Month. Really, though, there's no special month needed. The T, the transgender push, is marketed to kids and young adults all year long. However, every June we see an uptick, and this month is no exception, as iconic corporations roll out special products to celebrate Pride Month. There's an LGBTQ Lego set. A tweet from the Lego group says the playsets were developed to ensure our future builders are accepting of everyone. Disney is offering the Rainbow Disney Collection. One of the items is a stuffed Mickey Mouse wearing rainbow-colored shorts. The Daily Signal's cultural commentator Nicole Russell says, pushing gender and sex on kids is not only inappropriate, but also unrelated to, indeed antithetical to, the magic, wonder, and innocence of childhood the Disney brand purports to embody. Mars Wrigley has released limited edition Skittles Pride Packs with all-gray candies and all-gray packaging that says, only one rainbow matters. A share of the profit on each package goes to the LGBT advocacy group GLAAD. Because boxes are for cereal, not for people, Kellogg's is also partnering with GLAAD to offer a Together with Pride themed cereal. I repeat, the kids who are the targets of these marketing campaigns are for the most part too young to care or even be thinking about sex or gender identity. But there's a different sort of marketing that targets older kids and teens online. Transgender YouTube personalities and celebrities are given prominence. Gender transition is touted as the answer to emotional struggles. In an essay for the Claremont Institute, Mary Eberstadt describes how teens, especially girls, are drawn in through videos posted by trans tastemakers who document their gender transitions, and by the accolades that accrue to a teen who comes out online. She says corrupt doctors, politicians, merchants, and others who are stoking this trans kid craze must answer for it. We must make them. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for the final segment here today, and we wanted to just feature the piece by, again, Penna Dexter. And if you are not familiar, you can go to the website. First of all, read her piece on Pride Month, but also you can click on this little button that says never miss a viewpoint, and we send those to your inbox. Mine Monday through Friday, Penna's on Saturday. But Penna, we haven't talked about Pride Month, and since you wrote about it, let's talk about this because it's showing up in places I would never have imagined. Disney, Legos, all sorts of places. So give us an overview of what's happening right now.
Well, yeah, it's hard to miss, and in a sense, if people want to have that movement for pride for LGBT, now it's LGBTQ, then they can have it. But I think the bad part of this is, and what I wrote about in my commentary, is that it's being targeted and marketed toward children. And so that's why you have Lego now, Pride, Lego, one gender, transgender Legos. You've got Disney Stuffed Mickey wearing rainbow-colored shorts. It's the Rainbow Disney collection. You got Mars Wrigley with Skittles, and this is interesting. They make it all gray. The Skittles are gray, and the Pride Packs are gray, and it says only one rainbow matters. I mean, Kellogg's and just others, and that's one thing. And it's, parents have to explain it to their kids, perhaps, or they just ignore it. Whatever, the kids don't even ask about it. But I think where it gets bad is what we're seeing now, and where the really bad repercussions are coming, is for young people, older children, young teens, and teens moving in through junior high into high school. And there's so much on the internet now. First of all, there's the role models like Jazz and the YouTube videos that glamorize transgenderism. And then there's the websites that say that if you've got, if you're not happy, it could be because you're in the wrong body. And there's so much of this. We've had people writing about the girls who show up at the clinics wanting a gender change in groups with their friends. So it becomes a social thing.
Right.
And that the fact that medical associations are forcing this on doctors, and doctors cannot give really honest advice about the harms being done by not only the surgeries, but even the things that come before that, the puberty blockers and the hormones and things like that. So this it's kind of a different kind of marketing that's what's the most damaging, targeting older kids and teens online. And, you have in fashion, there are these people that will constantly post their lives and what they're wearing, and they'll sell things that way. If you see me in this outfit, well, here's where you can get it. And they get a little cut of that. Well, it's kind of the same thing. It's the trans tastemakers. And they're making it glamorous. They're documenting their gender transitions. And they're also giving attaboys to teenagers who announce that they have begun the process of transitioning. The society is afraid to say anything. The people that disagree are afraid to say anything.
Very true.
And the people, and there are just so many people that are just affirming this type of thing. It's crazy. And, I was just surprised here in the state of Texas that we couldn't even pass something that would ban the ability to give kids these drugs without their parents knowing, or give kids these drugs without, being very, very certain that it will help them, and it won't. But and then we couldn't even pass something that would protect women, female athletes.
Yes.
So, if Texas couldn't do it, I mean, hopefully they still will in a special session. I don't know. But it's pretty bad. And the powers that be that are influencing this thing in the culture are too influential. I think we need to, if people are disturbed about this, if they think they're just being tolerant, they have got to look deeper into this. This is going to cause huge problems in the lives of most of these people as they become adults. So Pride Month is serious business, and I think we need to take it seriously, and we need to start pushing back on some of these agendas.
Let me encourage you to get a copy of Penna's commentary. It's on there right now. Of course, it will arrive in your inbox if you have signed up for it. And you mentioned banned. I was thinking they have actually banned When Harry Became Sally.
Yeah.
That's Ryan Anderson. They haven't banned yet Abigail Schreier, both of them who've been on the program, Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze, but I'm sure they probably will. And so in some respects, people don't even have the ability to get good, solid, accurate information. And so that's another issue and another reason for, I hope people will support Point of View, because you actually did hear the interview we did with Ryan Anderson. You did hear the interview we did with Abigail Schreier.
Or you can go back and get it.
Yeah, but you probably won't hear it on ABC, NBC, CBS,
Right.
Certainly not on MSNBC, and maybe you'll show up on Fox News, but you can't even be sure of that anymore. So, Dr. Merrill Matthews, it's Pride Month, but Penna reminds us that the target seems to be our kids, and in our cases, our grandkids.
It's been going on for a while, but when Barack Obama bathed the White House in rainbow colors, I thought this marks a change, because they're saying from the White House it's okay to sort of push this effort, and it is unbelievable to me, the effort there. It's one thing to say somebody who's an adult has decides they want to change, but they're pushing an agenda on kids.
I think another key turning point was the Obergefell decision.
Yes.
Requiring all states to recognize marriage between a man and a man as marriage. I mean, this agenda then the throttle was pushed, the pedal was pushed to the metal afterwards, and the transgender agenda it gained so much momentum. And now we're dealing with this, and I just hope people will look at the common sense side of it, the medical science side of it, and the harms that it does. The fact that, women are going to lose their opportunities in Texas. I mean, a lot of states did pass protections for women, but Texas didn't, for, scholarships because of sports, because they're being beat by biological men. So it's an agenda that it's just ridiculous. I hope it goes away. It's not going to go away by itself, though. We need to stand up.
And again, if you're looking for some interviews, we just mentioned those two. Even yesterday, the second hour, we spent some time with Jim Dennison. And when we first started, I think some people are saying, why are you guys talking about same-sex marriage? Because he was making the case that you move from acceptance to stigmatization. And now anybody that stands up and says, I just think it might not be a good idea for a biological male, now calling himself, now herself, a transgender girl, to compete with all the other girls. I mean, the kind of phrases that they use to attack you on. And so it's going to take courage. It's going to take discernment. And if hopefully we are providing some of the kind of education that you need so that you can stand strong and really provide good, solid arguments, because these battles are going to be fought in the athletic programs, they're going to be fought in the school councils, and they're going to be fought maybe at the state legislature. And so we'll see where that goes.
School dormitories.
Yeah, for sure.
Prisons.
Unbelievable stuff. So we wanted you to certainly be able to find Penna Dexter's commentary. It's called Pride Month, and it's on the website, pointofview.net. Let me also mention IPI.org. Great resources there. And we're coming to the end of everybody's fiscal year, so I'm sure you could use financial support. We're certainly
We can always use financial support.
We would hope people would consider supporting Point of View as well. And so if you've learned some things today, let me encourage you to do that. One last time, we do have, of course, a link to Dr. Merrill Matthews' piece on the backdoor scheme to raising minimum wage. We've got some things about inflation, Keystone Pipeline, 5 media myths that actually Biden won the White House, and we never got to the sanctuary city for the unborn. We'll get to that another time, but lots of great stories all on our website at pointofview.net. Hope you have a great weekend. We are certainly grateful for you to join us. I'm looking forward to a great series of interviews next week. Matter of fact, Dr. Erwin Lutzer will be in studio with us on one of those days, so have a great weekend. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes, and we'll see you back here on Monday on Point of View.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View radio talk show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.